Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, well, we're taking on a pretty fascinating role. Today, we're not just passive readers or even just investors. Nope, we are financial detectives. When a massive corporation just suddenly collapses, the headlines always paint it as this out-of-the-blue, tragic accident. But for those who actually know where to look, it is never an accident. It's really a solvable mystery, complete with clues, early warning signs, and a literal trail of evidence. So this brings us to the ultimate question, right? The one every investor, employee, and market observer eventually has to ask. Can we actually predict corporate collapse? Is it truly possible to spot financial ruin before the general public, or even everyday investors realize what's happening behind closed doors? Well, the answer is a resounding yes. But, and this is a big but, only if you're using the right diagnostic tools.
Okay, let's dive into this with a totally legendary piece of financial history. Back in 1973, the W.T. Grant Company was projecting this absolute illusion of perfect health. I mean, their stock was trading at nearly 20 times earnings. If you were just glancing at their stock price or their basic top-line profitability, you'd think this company was an absolute titan, an incredibly safe bet. But, as you probably guessed, right after this high-flying valuation, the company suffered a complete, catastrophic failure. No warning bells, just boom, done.
So you gotta ask, how did a company that looks so incredibly good on paper fail so spectacularly? Well, here's the twist. While the surface-level, traditional metrics looked frankly fantastic, a deeper dive into their actual cash flows would have revealed impending doom. In fact, for a full decade before their bankruptcy, W.T. Grant's operations were a net user of cash rather than a provider. They literally weren't generating cash internally. They were just slowly bleeding out, and it was completely hidden behind this facade of stable earnings and high stock valuations.
Part 1. Spotting the warning signs, the illusion of health.
Traditional metrics deceive us all the time, which is exactly why we need to equip ourselves with better, more rigorous investigative tools. We can't just look at a company's shiny exterior, right? We have to examine the engine. To do that, we first need to lock down exactly what experts mean when they talk about a company being financially healthy. It goes way beyond just having a recognizable brand name or a busy storefront. Financial health is strictly defined as the company's ability to manage its earning resources for expenses and debt repayment. It's the raw nuts and bolts mechanics of survival, bringing enough actual tangible value in to cover what inevitably must go out.
Part 2. Two types of insolvency. Identifying the disease.
Before we can really use our financial diagnostic tools, we have to understand the anatomy of the disease we're trying to catch. And in the financial world, that disease is insolvency. Think of insolvency as coming in two distinct, really dangerous strains. On one side, we have cash flow insolvency. This is when you technically have sufficient assets to pay your debts. Maybe you own huge, incredibly valuable properties, but you just lack the liquid methods of payment to cover a bill that's due today. Because, hey, you can't pay your employees with a literal brick from your warehouse. Fortunately, cash flow issues can often be negotiated. But on the other side, we have balance sheet insolvency. This is the terminal stage. This happens when a company's assets are completely insufficient to cover its debts, period. This strain of the disease often leads straight to bankruptcy court.
Part 3. The predictive financial models, the forensic tools.
So how do we actually test for these diseases before they become terminal? We turn to predictive financial models. These are the forensic tools that hardcore financial analysts and forensic accountants use to uncover the hidden truth beneath a company's super-polished annual reports. To give you an idea of how powerful these tools can be, consider the Grover model. Historically, studies have shown the Grover model achieving a staggering 96.6% accuracy rate in predicting financial distress. I mean, 96.6%. That is an incredibly high expectation for an early warning system. When a tool is rated that highly, you absolutely want it in your investigative kit. But it is not the only tool we have. We also have the Springate model, which is another highly respected diagnostic test.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how these models actually work under the hood. Rather than getting bogged down in complex algebra, because nobody wants that, let's just look at the specific vital signs these diagnostic models measure. Both models test working capital relative to total assets, as well as net profit, or EBIT, to total assets. But then they kind of branch out. The Springate model looks closely at net profit before taxes relative to current liabilities and how efficiently sales are generated from total assets. Meanwhile, the Grover model leans heavily on return on assets, specifically net income relative to total assets. Basically, they're measuring the pulse, the blood pressure, and the oxygen levels of a company's financial body.
Part 4. Testing the early warnings, the NBFC case study.
Let's see how this builds when we actually apply these forensic tools in a real-world scenario. We're going to examine a totally fascinating test case involving 3 Indian non-banking financial companies, or NBFCs. The companies are DHFL, ILFS, and SRE. Our investigation window covers a critical 5-year period, stretching from the 2014-2015 financial year right up to 2018-2019. This is the exact window during which these 3 massive financial institutions were quietly but surely marching toward bankruptcy. We already know how the story ends. They all collapsed. But the mystery is, did our forensic tools actually see it coming?
Well, the data from this period reveals a pretty shocking twist. The Grover model, remember the one with the historical 96.6% accuracy rate, generated incredibly inconsistent warnings for these 3 companies over the 5-year period. Take DHFL, for example. In 2015, Grover said bankrupt. Then, in 2016 and 2017, it completely flipped to not bankrupt. ILFS showed as perfectly healthy for 3 straight years before suddenly flashing a bankruptcy warning in 2018. It was a totally chaotic readout for companies that were ultimately doomed.
Part 5. The final verdict. Which model solved the case?
If Grover was giving us mixed signals, which model actually managed to solve the case and see the reality of the situation? The data brilliantly illustrates the difference. When we analyze the average scores across that 5-year period, the Grover model falsely deemed DHFL as a solvent company, keeping it just a hair above the distress threshold. But the Springgate model? It literally didn't miss a beat. The Springgate score places a company in the bankruptcy zone if it falls below 0.862. And what happened here? The Springgate model consistently scored DHFL, ILFS, and SRE well below that threshold. It correctly identified all 3 companies as severely financially distressed.
So, the crucial point is this. In this specific real-world investigation into failing financial institutions, the Springgate model was by far the superior early warning system. While other models gave inconsistent, really noisy data, Springgate recorded highly accurate, undeniable results. It proves that if you measure the exact right vital signs, the disease of insolvency just cannot hide.
What you should really take away from this explainer is that a company can look like a towering, invincible success right up until the literal day its doors close. Traditional metrics and basic profits, they are just the surface. Forensic financial models prove that the clues are always there in the data. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder. If the numbers truly do tell the future, are you sure you're looking at the right ones? Thank you so much for joining me today, and hey, keep your eyes open.